Welcome back, and I'm happy to say that Palantir Vision is back. I'm going to be committing much more time to this project going forward. I know the channel has been somewhat dormant from, more than a year, so from 2023 looking back to 2022 even, there have been some times where I've put it aside, but I think Palantir's at a very exciting point in time. I've been following it from the beginning, so I believe my viewpoint is ultimately very helpful to many of you, even if it is just an additional perspective. To be clear, I don't listen to anyone else in the Palantir community. I make my own investment decisions and thought processes through my own research. So I think having an independent voice is very helpful. So I intend to amplify my research and content going forward. There have been a number of initiatives I've been working on, like my private valuation model, as well as some institutional access to data and information with the private newsletter that I've been focused on, that I think I'm going to sort of put to the side and say, you don't need to subscribe to those. If you're subscribed to them, go ahead and unsubscribe. Hopefully you found value, but I'm going to come back and be making hopefully at least a daily video. Palantir is a stock that I think is the most consequential software company in the public markets, if not in the globe or on any equity trading platforms. So that said, once again, I think I have a unique perspective having followed the company for so long. I think I have just at least to be humble, something to share, something worth sharing at the very least. So I know returning to this fairly dormant channel is not how I want to come back, but I think I can get some momentum going and ultimately provide value, which is what this is all about. And I'm very excited. So we're going to kick it off with this interview. I have not watched it yet, but with CEO Alex Karp from September of 2023. So let's get started here on the return of Palantir Vision. Also, please let me know what you want to see from me in the comments. I'm going to need tons of ideas in terms of content, what you want to see from me, reactions, data points, deep analysis, modeling, and everything like that. Again, unique perspective from me in terms of my understanding of the Palantir story, how it all comes together, while also understanding the financial aspect of it and the background and what that means for the stock. Understanding the short term, the long term, how it all ties together, and what that means for retail investors. So with that said, let's get started.
It is my privilege to introduce you Dr. Alexander Karp, CEO of Palantir, and you are a co-founder of this company. And before that, you had a quite distinguished academic career, which
wasn't distinguished. It was academic.
Well, at the end of the day, you became lawyer. You became a doctor of philosophy in Germany, studying also under Jürgen Habermas, who's really famed philosopher. And you are active as well in the fitness area. You do martial arts, as I understand. You swim. And you do cross-country skiing, which is a big thing in Estonia.
I'm a cross-country ski addict. Yes, I'm quite good. We can all go cross-country skiing at some point. It's not very popular, actually, in America because if you want to have a sport that's successful in America, you have to have an after party. There's no after party in cross-country skiing because yeah, there's an after party. Okay, well, yeah. It can help cross-country skiing because in America we suffer because you need to maintain a high cardio and strength basis. And then if you do alpine, you kind of go downhill. And my impression is you smoke and drink and have fun. And if you're doing cross-country skiing, you go to sleep and get up early. But yeah, there's a lot of advantages to cross-country skiing.
At the finish of Tartu Marathon, we drink butter beer. So basically,
okay,
we do
well, that can work too. Yeah.
So there are two similarities between us. One is to avoid trouble and jail. We have to be really careful what we say in public. Second one is we both love cross-country skiing. So
you do classic or skating or both?
Both. Yeah. It depends on the snow.
Terrain, snow, yeah.
Exactly. So you were one of the first CEOs to go down to Kiev last year and offer your support. So how has the AI actually impacted the battlefield, in your opinion?
Well, there's an official version of AI.
Interesting to see because this is a consistent question and persistent, for that matter, about how much can Palantir share about the impact of the technology specifically in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Now, Palantir has rightfully told us that they can't share too much with respect to their work here, but this has been a point that Alex Karp has said, like, we wish we could share more, but the products that are being leveraged in certain capacities, but they can't for obvious matters. So I'm interested to see his direction with this question, because we've had that comment from him many times previously.
In the broader space, which was really large language models, convincing people that technology was relevant, that it could help them with homework and poetry, and they could rap like a rapper, except for they're not a rapper. But the real beginning of the AI revolution really started a number of years ago, using, it's kind of obvious, but when people say AI, what they really mean are, currently mostly they mean large language models, but there are large-scale algorithmic utilities of software which are AI, and they have the advantage.
That is also a good point, right? Because a lot of the AI craze that we hear today very much is focused around the large language models, right? ChatGPT, Bard, everything like that. The reason that OpenAI needs so many GPUs and so on, but AI is really so much more than that. So while Palantir has their AIP product to benefit from this secular trend, really the work in AI that they've been doing is so much more. If you think about the AI capacities in Foundry and Gotham, it goes well beyond just large language models, right? So that's what everyone's thinking about today, but Palantir's been in AI really from the beginning.
Being precise, large language models have the advantage of being able to gather information from all over the world, but are not precise. What happened on the battlefield was that you saw a small power with negligible investment in hardware doing much better than it should based on technical acuity and instruments. And
right, so this is, again, something we've heard before, but it's worth reiterating, like the power of Palantir's technologies. The incremental access to it provides substantial results. So you can see this in the commercial context or in the war with Russia-Ukraine. So it'd be interesting if he can provide specifics, which I don't think he will get into for obvious reasons, as I mentioned, but we do have that understanding that the software has certainly contributed a significant amount to the current status of it.
The interesting thing about technology is, in by and large, technology doesn't lead to societal change until there's a galvanizing moment where people really believe it can make a difference, meaning life or death, or your business goes out of business. And before the war, there was certainly a sense we have a global business, so in every market we're in, that software AI was kind of a luxury product. If you were geeky or unpopular, you would kind of, get involved in it. But otherwise, you could kind of just not invest in it. And I think that's, luckily for the West, that was the approach of our adversaries. On top of that, what happens in these countries is where things look like they're fraudulent, like their view of technology, probably the fraudsters grifted on it and took all the money and put it in their bank account. So it really led to a very surprising moment. And then that combined with large language models coming on the scene has basically changed the world. A world where hardware dominant industry with very light software, which light is being a euphemism for maybe basically non-existent, were the dominant players in the world. This had some huge advantages for the Western Alliance because, in general, Europe is a dominant player in hardware, and America is a dominant player in software, with exceptions. There are phenomenal software companies outside of America, and there are phenomenal hardware companies inside of America. But if you had to generalize, that would be the generalization. And what has happened now is, and then inside of America, you have the problem that most of the software companies that are relevant are really West Coast based. And we moved to Colorado, which is also on the West Coast. But this moving from, this is a joke, when we started 20 years ago and we were building products for intel agencies, really everyone outside the intel agencies thought that these products were non-relevant, basically maybe useful for a narrow use case, but wouldn't change the world, despite the fact they did. I mean, I think Europe would be very different if the terror attacks that have been stopped by many people in this room, in many cases using our product, you would have a different populist landscape. But in any case, it's now center on everyone's mind, and how to negotiate this, especially in the war context, is arguably the most important thing we can all think about.
So My Ukrainian colleagues told me.
And just before we continue here, that moves on to the commercial context as well. So he's saying, like, you don't understand the impact of the product until there's almost an existential need for it, right? So with the war, but also in the commercial context, alluding to it a bit there with the competitive nature of adopting these AI technologies, how that benefits your business, efficiencies, other opportunities that weren't before possible with large language models even. And so that's what Palantir's providing these enterprises with AIP, which is really this opportunity that wasn't before seen, let's say, even a year ago at this point. So it's just very interesting to think of how fast something can change in this industry and how quickly everyone can move in one direction. And in this case, how Palantir stands to benefit from that.
At Cyber Commanders Forum that war changes everything. So it means that we have the privilege and time to kind of make those changes in advance. So what's your kind of take on how do you see that AI will change the relative kind of power of different countries?
Well, there's different forms of AI. So internal surveillance, we should avoid, and we should use AI and software to limit the scope and intrusive nature of internal surveillance on our citizens. In fact, you have to fight weapons with weapons. So people who understand how surveillance actually works, technical actors with legislative interests have to write the legislation to guarantee us the maximum amount of freedom we in the West. And that freedom includes the right to be forgotten, the right to request to be forgotten. I tend to be, there's many different ways of looking at civil liberties. I still am probably mostly, in Europe, you're focused on consumer and government. I'm much more concerned about what the government sees and how they use it. Can it be used in surveillance? Under what conditions? Can it be used to prosecute? Can it be used to defame you? So limiting the scope of that is also a technical endeavor and has to be done by people who actually understand this and who are non-political.
Civil liberties, we've heard this from the beginning with Palantir, so it's definitely not new information, but important that they are grounded in these principles that clients and organizations gravitate towards, which you find as a distinguishing factor when choosing between Palantir or an alternative.
Which is a problem. We had a vibrant civil liberties community in America. That still exists, but it's often, Republicans are bad, Democrats are good. I'm more on the Democratic side, and but you need nonpartisan people to do this. Then you have an issue, which is that if you just look at it from the American perspective, the West Coast is the dominant player. Almost not all providers of this technology come from the West Coast. So even in America, you have to negotiate. A number of people asking for governance, which I support, are actually just interested in not buying the best product. You have in Europe, Europe is has regulation. Europe is obviously, you have big countries and large countries. I do think that there's a somewhat of a division of interest there because it is maximally in the interest of Europe to both foster its industry and make it possible for companies to export their software, but it's absolutely imperative for the small countries. And it's a massive advantage for the small countries because you don't need, with the correct implementation of software, you can outmaneuver the large countries on the battlefield or on the economic field. And here, this country has just a huge advantage, as do countries in this region, because there's the legislation, but then to quote Durkheim on contractual thing is there's the preconditions of the contract. So you can have legislation, but do people really still buy the best product or do they buy the local product? I'm here to tell you, if you buy the product that's not the best, you will lose. So, and then you have the question, well, how do you identify the real product? And I can tell you.
So this is a very important point that's key to the Palantir thesis. You become more competitive as an organization when you use Palantir's product because it's the best on the market, right? So I'm interested to hear his thoughts on how you know that, right? So you can know it from a number of ways, but Palantir's not big on marketing. They're just big on brand recognition. So let's hear what he has to say.
What I tell people in America, there are the leaders of this field, you must be in contact with them. The good news for Europe is a lot of the leaders in that field are European. The bad news is many of them are living in America. So you must talk to them. Talking to your local provider, whether that's your local provider in DC who's never heard of a large language model, or it's your local provider, that's necessary, but it's, to use an overused term, it's not sufficient, because unlike the revolutions of the past, the difference between the person you know and the person who's best is the difference between winning and losing a war. And this is just a massive shift, and the people who understand this will outperform. The people who ignore this are going to do very poorly. America does have a huge advantage. We have a lot of political craziness. You may not be aware of it. But de facto, the GDP of America is going to increase. It already has increased vis-a-vis Europe quite a bit, which is a cause for concern. Because it's easier and the adoption is much, much quicker, especially in industry, in the military context also. And then there's a question of how do we know, then vis-a-vis our adversaries, look, China, which I think is, and that's something that Europeans have to pay attention to, America has shifted from a country where I think I'm the only reasonably prominent person I know that has an educational background in Europe. And this would have been different 50 years ago, 30 years ago. That does not exist. America does not have the emotional connection to Europe it once had. And so that's another reason I think small countries are particularly important, because you have to go to America and explain what's going on. It's not the case anymore that Americans are as focused on what's happening here as emotionally, and that will affect the politics over time. But America is very focused on China. And then the question is, what are Russia and China doing? They're behind, but we have to be very focused in America, because they won't stay behind very long, simply because while we have the better technology players, they have leadership that's very friendly, that navigates engineering structures arguably as well or better than we do. I would say especially in the case of China, that there's a huge, it's very hard for humanities people and engineers to actually communicate. And that's something all Western societies struggle with. And that gives, say, China an advantage, because that's not an issue that they have as much. On the other hand, they focus most of their efforts on internal surveillance and the actual selection technologies, which are a hybrid of LLMs and algorithms, are being produced in the West.
So some of the people who are advocating that we should pause the development of AI, what's your kind of take on
there's
Here we go again. We've heard this before, and it's not really relevant, right? It's not happening. It's not relevant to Palantir. Obviously, Palantir's argument is the other side isn't going to pause, so why would we, right? So it would be nice to pause development on AI, take a step back, think about it a lot, but consider Palantir has already well defined its principles and how it stands on its use of data, privacy, civil liberties, and all of that. So they don't really need to pause to figure out the best way and path forward. They've already done that work. So that's just my thoughts on it.
It's very easy to talk in absolute terms. We live on the battlefield in relative terms, meaning in absolute terms, of course, typically you have two camps, those that say it's dangerous and those that say it's safe. I'm in a arguably different camp. I think these technologies are potentially dangerous, and the dangers are obvious. Even if you don't get to general AI, where the AI takes over, there are real surveillance dangers that we should all be afraid of and working against. Right. You should have the right to have a personal life. Your health, your private affairs. These things should not be things that the government has easy, or arguably companies have access to, or in an unregulated way. But I think the debate is very academic, because the basis of our civilization, I believe, is that the West imposed technological superiority, and through that technological superiority, garnered the rule of law, human rights. The flaw in the logic, at least in the, I would say, Western context, is many people believe that the rule of law and human rights are ipso facto, in an automatic way, something that appears, and we internalize them because they are a superior way to live. I believe they are a superior way to live, but I believe that they were adopted because people saw that the people who build the best rockets, the best bombs, the best cars, to build safety devices, also believed in this ethical framework. And therefore, people equated the ethical framework with technological innovation and growth. If you if you believe that, and those are a series of assumptions that most people I know do not believe, the logical consequence is that these technologies are dangerous, but we have to be ahead because otherwise our adversaries will be ahead. And the framework that they want to live in is not a rule of law, not a human rights. For all the problems we have in the West, there are no other places where you can experience as little discrimination, as little bias, as little unfairness as Western countries. So I'm not saying we're perfect, but I do think we're the best imperfect societies that have ever existed. And this is why, not to go offline, I think the fundamental erosions of the West are where people inside Western countries or outside Western countries believe we're not delivering on innovation and things that help economies grow, and therefore adopt what I would view as more regressive policies and views and vote for those people. So I think the progressive, classically defined approach requires heavy investment in these technologies, especially in the military context, and coalitions of partners, both partners and translators. And I would say, if we're being optimistic, I've been saying this for 20 years and mostly got yelled at. Now I only get yelled at every 2 days, not every day. So I think people are moving towards this, not because of the persuasiveness of my arguments, but because of the persuasiveness of the actions of our adversaries, which always exploit weakness.
Which is an interesting way of saying that Palantir can do all of the marketing, all of the explaining, talking to potential clients and outreach and everything like that they want. But if those same potential customers don't believe in this secular trend with AI, don't believe that they need these types of products to remain competitive, then it's not very worthwhile, right? So Palantir's not a sales and marketing organization. It's an engineering-focused business. That's the majority of their employees. That's the majority of their focus, as it should be, right? Building products, that's what they've talked about, thinking 5 years ahead and developing what the future is going to be all about, right? So that's a little bit of an additional view on the importance of engineering and less so on marketing from what he's saying here.
And we have a raging debate in America about all these issues. And my only simple point is you can be right on all the issues, but if you miss the point that our adversaries will always and ruthlessly exploit internal and external weakness, you've won every point, but you've lost the argument.
So you've had over 20 years of experience actually implementing those solutions. So what's the role of Palantir and what's the advice to our distinguished guests here? So kind of how do you employ or kind of introduce effective AI solutions and mitigate the
Call your children, ask them who the smartest tech person is, and get them to work for you. I can make look, I think our products are unique. We've proven they're unique. We're a successful company. You need accurate information. I could give you accurate information, but you might have trouble believing me because I'm also selling a product. So don't believe me. And find the best person you can find is the smartest person who's worked at a company that's world-class in this area.
So he's talking about talent here, right? So Palantir is very focused on recruiting and retaining, because those are two separate items, top talent. World-class talent, Palantir ranks among the most difficult firms to work for and most demanded jobs for engineering in software and for technology. And so it's because it's a real focus and it's what drives the company. So as long as that remains a top priority, I think Palantir continues to produce some of the best products in the world that have the most consequential impact, that lead to financial results, and that make it a stock worth owning, right? So that's a very simplistic way of looking at it, but I hear that reiterated in what he's saying here.
There's a famous meme in America I think it's wrong. It's like you win by failing and failing and failing until you win. But in reality, you learn by being in an organization that's had major setbacks and then wins. And there's subtle difference. You don't really want to call the person who's had 50 failures. You want to call the person who's had a company or an organization that has had major setbacks and in the end won. And that you want to identify people who've been at those companies who you trust, so from your country, and you want to put them very close to you and ask them who's real, who's not. Because otherwise you're going to get a lot of conflicting interests, and you're going to make the wrong decision about who to work with, what products to buy, what products to implement, who to avoid. So I know this is not, I know your jobs are to talk to everybody, and you do a great job of that. I'm here to tell you, identify a couple people and talk to them regularly. And then you have to have
Quality over quantity, right? And so this is interesting in terms of the information that you're focusing on and that's letting you drive your business. So you want to have very specific data points that enable decision making. So this can extend to Palantir's product or how they run their own business internally. You want to make sure you have accurate data that you can trust. So whether these are people that you're asking about what's the correct direction that we should pursue of some kind, or if it's really any other application of something similar. Alex Karp saying here, if you identify the data points that matter and you keep following them consistently over time, you will be successful. So I think it's an interesting way of looking at it, right? Because when you're running a business like Palantir, you have to approach it from all sorts of different angles. And so because he's able to take a really high level view of the company and is not bogged down in the technicals of the product, I think that is a tremendous advantage for him as a CEO.
business or military specific use case with a very tight timeline, and one of the advantages small countries have, and a relatively small budget. One of the dangers we have in big countries around this is we start, in the end you will need sums that are real. But in the beginning, you need to identify the players that are real and have enough money just to get them going and to actually test what's working. You need to be personally involved. One of the mistakes we have, we're running out of time, but now we have it all over large organizations, not governments, but any large organization is, they're built for a hardware world. In the hardware world, you had the CEO and the tech person, and they didn't like each other. They avoided each other as much as possible, and then, but honestly, probably tried to get each other fired the whole time. And then you see who wins, and the only winner are the lousy.
So here's the argument about how important the culture is within the organization. So we've heard Karp talk about how he thinks he does a great job at cultivating that culture of these very robust and explosive personalities, bringing them all together in an environment that is conducive to success. So once again, another check of the box in terms of how we as investors view how the company is being run and what he's saying here.
The software world presupposes the person in charge gets involved in the tech issues. You don't have to be technical, but you have to understand what is the business, what is the military outcome we want, what is the timeline, cut that timeline in half, because if the people are actually delivering a product, they're actually implementing, they need 10% of the time that they say they do.
So that's very interesting, where he's saying if you're doing real work, you can do it faster because what you're doing is meaningful and what you're doing will ultimately have a successful outcome. At least that's how I interpret that. Let me know what you think. But also, it's this very militant view of the structure of progress along the way. And so I think even what he's saying there is having a non-technical understanding and perspective almost is a benefit, because you're viewing it from the sideline where you're not observing and having opinions on potential restraints. So that's what I really like about a leader like Alex Karp, is you're not in the same mindset as the engineers. You could say, I want it to have this outcome. I want our product by this time. I want it to be able to do this. Whereas if you're an engineer yourself, you might already have this outlook that something might not be possible, that it might take longer, that it might not be able to achieve some set of criteria. Whereas if you're coming at it from a general perspective and opinion, you might be able to push for an outcome that's even better.
flatten your hierarchy. Now, this isn't possible across a large organization tomorrow, but you can pick a subset of organization and start with accurate ingredients, who's good, who's not, flatten the hierarchy, define the business use case, cut the business time in it by at least 2, offer that small amount of money with a larger amount if it's successful, and run, don't walk. And you can have a world-class.
I really like a lot of this sense that I'm getting is a sense of urgency, right? That's what you want from a leader. That's what you want from a CEO of a public company you're invested in, is this maniacal focus on pushing forwards, not at any cost, right? But in a sense that you're getting is that they're very focused at Palantir. They have their mission, they have their products, they have the impact of the products, and they're not done. They're not done building, they're not done executing. They're really at just the start of their financial story, which is what's so exciting. But it's this sense of urgency that drives innovation that I'm really getting out of this talk that I really like.
Software-empowered organization. If you violate any of those steps, you will invariably spend a lot of money. And the first way you will know you've gone wrong is you will hear from the person, oh, this is going to work out, but we need twice as much time and 4 times as much money. That's when you pull the plug.
So
this is back on, constraints of any kind that I've already talked too long on from an abstract perspective, but I like that. What he's saying there is we need it done fast, we need it done effectively, or it's not getting done. And so, it's definitely the approach you want from a company that's trying to stay profitable, get profitable. I do wonder if Palantir has, a Skunks Works team of some kind that's really given, a sizable portion of the R&D budget and no time constraints, but it's just told to run on new projects that are more secretive. So I do wonder if that's the case. I'm sure it's possible to some degree, but for Foundry, for Gotham, you don't want to be overspending and you don't want to be wasting time. You want to be cut right to the chase and be driving and innovating. And so that's what I've gotten out. So let's hear them wrap this up.
I think good show and good interview ends well when people want to hear more. So I think you have succeeded in that. So thank you, Dr. Karp. Give a round of applause, please.
Thank you.
So there it is. I really enjoyed running through this interview with you all. Once again, let me know what you want to hear from me in the many, many, many videos coming in the future. Message me on X Twitter or leave it in the comments. Again, I am dedicated to bringing much more content. I've been sitting on the sidelines too long, and just as humble as I can say it, I think I am an important voice in the Palantir community. So I want to really leverage the platform that you all have given me over the past few years since 2020. So hopefully you're excited by that, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. As always, until next time.